2, 1. We are live. Hello and welcome to PropTechBuzz, a podcast channel where we talk to PropTech founders and CEOs from all over the world and learn from them insights about building PropTech companies. Today, I'm thrilled to have with me Alex Storey. Alex is the CEO, founder at Reomnify. The tagline for Reomnify is alternative data for real estate, and this will be the theme for the conversation today. What does alternative data mean? Alex has been an angel investor, board member in a few startups. Before that, he was heading channel sales for Google, and then he built Reomnify. We'll start with understanding what were his motivations to begin Reomnify, what problems they want to solve. So that will be the conversation today. Reomnify, by the way, aims to arm key decision makers with the data and insights that ultimately make our cities better to live in. So with that, let's welcome Alex. Alex, welcome to PropTechBuzz. How are you doing today?
Very well. Thanks a lot for having me.
Alex, I was just very, very curious. I do not know how I met you, how I bumped onto your profile, but the moment I came across Reomnify, I was intrigued with the problem that you're trying to solve here. Data could be perceived and conceived in a lot of ways, but I would really like you to narrow down on exactly what do you do with data and real estate, and what's your value proposition to the world.
Absolutely. Thanks again. And yeah, I'm really happy to be here and introducing Reomnify and talking a little bit about the interesting topic of data. So my co-founder Girish and I started Reomnify about 3 years ago when we were both based out of Singapore. And really the broad aim we went in with was to help the real estate industry get more out of data. So both Girish and I had worked in other industries, finance, ad tech, etc., where data is used on a daily basis, and people have a very good understanding about how to get the most out of data. And having worked in real estate finance initially in my career and working in PropTech companies before Reomnify, it was very apparent that there are still significant barriers to people really being able to differentiate in real estate using data. And partly that's getting the most out of data they already have, but also accessing this whole huge growing universe of alternative or new broader data sets that can make a huge difference. So really, when we started out, our focus was building new data sets that people can feed into their tools, their analysis. And then as we progressed as a company, we've moved more into broader data services, helping people to turn their data into something more valuable, whether it's through cleaning that data, merging it, geocoding it, whatever it is. And now increasingly moving into helping them build data products as well. So really the overarching aim is still helping people in the real estate world get the most out of data. And we've expanded the types of services we offer there along the way.
So for the layman's audience, when you say new data sets, what does data sets mean? Could you give examples of what does real world data sets are?
Absolutely. So, I mean, a lot of people sort of say that real estate is not data driven, and I don't think that's exactly true. I think there are certain types of data that have been really valuable in real estate for a long time. What sort of historic transactions have taken place and what rentals are and what tenants are in buildings. All of these sorts of things have been analyzed a lot. But I think increasingly, particularly when you start to see the amount of data that's generated online and generated by individuals, activity through our mobile phones, etc., then I think you can start to see all these new worlds of data that really people probably didn't think about so much previously. And to walk you through some of the steps, I mean, people have always looked at real estate and transaction data, and then increasingly things like demographic data. That's been around for quite a long time, but increasingly are moving into things like location data, what is where in urban spaces, and then going beyond that into this very large world of web data. This whole universe of all the data that's generated online. How do you harness that and turn it into something that can help you make better and more differentiated decisions around, for example, location strategy? And that could be all sorts of things. It could be things like Airbnb data. It could be listings data. It could be social media data. And not only are these new sources for real estate companies to look at, there's also a whole new skill set required to be able to tease the value, simply because the volume often is so high, and also they can come in very unstructured formats. And so really those are the challenges that we're trying to dig down on with our platform and help people get to the point where they have data that's ready to analyze internally to help them make those better decisions.
Got it. Seems like, yes, more and more players in the real estate would massively benefit from real estate data and more kinds of data sets, including POIs, because then they can drive more prepared and more successful products to the market after being equipped with this data. However, how do you get this data? Is this data public? Is this data that you acquired from somewhere? Maybe you could shed some light on what are your sources of acquiring this data.
Absolutely. So the platform that our team has built is very well set up for ingesting very large volumes of unstructured data and turning into something that's clean and usable for analysts. Now, the data that's fed in effectively into that platform could be from anywhere, but the key examples are often could be government or public authority data that's just sat on hundreds of different local authority websites, for example, and it's about pulling those together, and turning that into a unified data set. It could be through broader websites, like if you imagine the McDonald's store locator page, right, which is updated pretty rigorously, understanding how McDonald's footprint is changing over time, but similarly for thousands of other brands. It can be public open source data. We look at government census data in Australia, for example, and then we've worked with third parties as well. So if you look at things like credit card data, you could look at things like mobility data. All of these third parties, we can work with their data sets as well. Now, this is all under the umbrella of third party data, right, outside of our customers, but actually also inside our customers, there's often a huge amount of data available as well. And often, getting that in a usable format, being able to merge that with external data sets so that you can get optimized value out of the two. And that's a task in itself as well. And that's often where we'll step in with the customer as well.
And are your customers willing to share their insider data to you? I'm assuming mixed reactions, because some would believe that if they offer you more data, they themselves would get better over time because you'd inform them better. But some would be wary to share their own data, isn't it? Am I right in?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a general understanding that there is value in first party or internal data, and people don't want to just lose that overnight. Some companies have spent years building up that understanding of the market. So there's two ways that we can look at that. Firstly, obviously, if we're exposed to a customer's data, then we are explicit that we will take every precaution to make sure that that is secure and is not exposed further, etc. But then also what we're increasingly seeing in the market, and this is relatively new for parts of the market, is companies willing to share more broadly elements of their data, as long as they're then getting the benefit of other companies sharing it as well. And that's a role that we could end up playing more, is pulling these various data sets together to make something that's greater than the sum of its parts, and returning that insight back to the contributing companies. But in most cases, we are obviously take very seriously, the privacy and security of our customers' data.
Got it. So, and then you're taking all this data from different sources, and they are raw, unstructured.
Yeah.
What is the kind of pre-processing that you do eventually make sense to all your customers, target customers?
Yeah, there's a number of stages that our platform works through. So obviously we ingest it first. We check the quality of the data. We understand the different sources that it's come from. Then we go through stages like standardizing, so everything's in the same format, deduplicating data. That's often quite a big task, particularly when you're working with thousands of data sources. And then we go through a stage that we call cognitive filtering, which is understanding over time the reliability and the freshness of different sources. And so through that looping of these different processes, we can really start to improve data quality, data freshness over time significantly. And really what we find is that customers will look at the outputs and will see significant time and effort savings as well as quality improvements versus doing this sort of thing themselves. A common conversation that we have is where often like a junior surveyor or an intern within our customers' organizations have been asked to sort of do this work manually, and it means that it's partial, it's got gaps in it, and it's not very fresh. And we obviously can sort of supercharge that at scale.
Got it. I'm imagining, and correct me if I'm wrong. After you process all this data, today you are offering what is the kind of end deliverable that you offer to the customers? Is this processed data, or if I have access to such data and I'm already doing processing and structuring this data, I could build applications and sell it to the world? No, what are your business models? Maybe that would be a good question.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we look at the ecosystem, like the PropTech ecosystem, we see a huge appetite amongst PropTechs, their investors, end customers to generate new insight, right? And we think the huge enabler of that is clean, fresh, reliable data. So instead of us going out and building some SaaS platform where we're analyzing and showing one specific thing, like recommending retail store locations or residential development locations or something like this,
or maybe building valuation models based on all this data.
Absolutely, building valuation models be a good example. We've seen the opportunity, we think, to sit one step beyond, right? So instead of competing with all those other solutions that are out there, we think that we could be a really great partner to them. And often, if you look at the PropTech side of our customer base, these are businesses that are typically got funded, are growing very fast, are focusing on the front end often, which is visualization of data, analysis of data, recommendations, valuations. But really, and that's where they see their unique contribution. And what they don't want to be focusing on necessarily is the sourcing, cleaning, engineering of data. And that's a great opportunity for us to come in and help them accelerate getting to market effectively. And that's something we've done a number of different times. And so really we've decided to sit at that sort of unglamorous end of the value chain. And effectively, I guess, selling pickaxes in a gold rush is the sort of analogy that people use. But we really want to be an enabler, either of the PropTechs that are trying to build on top of this sort of data, or to advisors who are increasingly trying to bring data into their recommendations, their consulting work, and to a lesser degree, but we think this is the growing area, with owners and operators of real estate themselves, who are increasingly investing in analytics, potentially building tools themselves, building teams of data scientists, but really with very little appetite to start looking at that deep level of data sourcing, cleaning, standardizing, etc. Really what they want is data to feed into those teams and those tools, rather than spending a lot of time going very deep on the type of work that we're doing.
Got it. So how do you productize this offering? Like, is it like you define a set of data sets and regions, and then based on the number of API calls to you price it? Maybe could you shed some light on what is
absolutely.
How do you price it? How do you offer it?
So when we look at a sort of data as a service model, what we find is that about half the time we have data sets that we've already built, often with history attached over a couple of years, and customers will subscribe either weekly or monthly to that data set, depending on the type of data. And then we'll provide that either through an API or through shared files or cloud-to-cloud integrations or whatever they want. We'll provide that data to them, often on an annual subscription. Now, that's about half the time. The other half the time when we're providing data is something we've not built before, but we get a bespoke request. And because we can now run these types of data set quite quickly through our platform, there's very minimal manual work involved. It means that we can offer a data set for a market we've not been in before, like Poland, for example, or parts of Southeast Asia. And then we can pump out a data set often within about 4 weeks. And again, that will be then subscribed to by our customer there.
Got it. Now, I see massive potential. I see a big problem that you're trying to solve here, because I'm well aware of so many prop tech players who are spending enormous resources in building their own data team, doing their own sourcing, uh, instead of focusing on their value proposition. And I know also how hard it is to ensure your data is fresh, ensure your entire pipeline is working, because your reputation also lies in how relevant the data is. But if you are spending time maintaining, debugging, deduplicating all by yourself, and then building insights on top, it's a huge problem. And if somebody can solve it and give ready data to consume and build insights on top, that is a massive problem solver. So I completely see a lot of value in what you're doing. Maybe could you give us some insights on what has been your current successes with your existing clients? How have they perceived this information, and how have they implemented this to grow their business?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll start off with some failures because I mean we've been at the business about 3 years, and I think early on, we were focusing very much on emerging markets. We saw that the growth in real estate there, that the lack of transparency typically in those real estate markets, and we thought that what we're doing is only really going to add value in those low transparency markets where people are really looking for new angles. And it was actually after a year or so that we learned that actually everyone's going through the same data challenges, even in the most developed and most transparent markets. So, that was a big learning for us. And now finding ourselves operating quite actively in markets like the UK and Australia and Singapore, and this year we'll be soft launching in the USA. That's where we've started to find really good traction. And so we will continue to work in emerging markets, but that's something we'll do with maybe 20% of our resources rather than the initial full push that we made. Now, something that's been really pleasing as we've gone is that we've been able to work with large global brands, and so we appreciate them taking a punt on an early stage company. But I think in what is a trust business, particularly when you're providing data and also being trusted to have access to customer data, being able to work with very blue chip brands like JLL and Knight Frank in multiple markets, and actually add value to their advisory work, that's kept us excited about those parts of the market. And then also being able to work with the end users as well. Obviously we work with a number of technology companies and enhance what they're doing, but actually being able to work with end users. A good example is Stockland, a very large developer in Australia, and be able to provide multiple data sets to them to feed into their live decision making that is actively helping them decide where to invest and where to focus their efforts. That's really satisfying. And then to be able to work with those companies over multiple years, that's the sort of thing that really motivates us. We get to understand those companies really well, and we can build new products to cater to them.
Got it. Could you maybe list out your majority of primary customer types? Like, are they what kind of customers are they? Are they AVM providers, or are they property developers, or what kind of primary customers do you cater to?
Yeah, absolutely. So they fit broadly into 3 buckets. So firstly, and I've mentioned a fair bit on this chat, prop techs themselves. And that's something particularly in markets like the UK we'll be doubling down on this year, particularly as they're increasingly cost constrained. They're under pressure to get product out to market. They're under pressure to scale without huge investment. So that's an area we'll be working really hard on, particularly in those more developed markets. So prop techs who are looking to get more products built quickly and affordably, that's something that we think our platform can really help them with. The second bucket is advisors. So whereas prop techs are kind of 100% technical, I guess, by their very nature, with advisors, maybe half of the advisors we work with, like large real estate advisors, are getting very deep into data. And we'll continue to work with the big brands. We'll be working with CBRE, JLL, etc. this year. there's a big appetite to feed in data to either their valuation and their consulting work, but also we'll see these businesses start to launch a lot of products themselves, like things that you would traditionally maybe think of as being a standalone prop tech. I think these large advisors will be launching a lot of these sort of services themselves, and we think we're well positioned to help them do that. And then the last bucket is real estate investors, real estate developers, and we're seeing a big wave of interest into what these guys can gather in the market that gives them an edge, right, over their competitors, whether that's around where to invest, where to develop, what to develop, where. And that's not going to happen overnight. As I mentioned, we've got great customers like Stockland in that space, and some of the build to rent operators, for example. But we think that in the future, that's where we're going to see this really large shift to these companies being much more data savvy, a huge appetite for differentiated data, maybe exclusive data, bespoke data sets, and being able to do much more interesting analysis rather than working with the same data sets as everyone else has access to, which has more traditionally been the route.
Got it. I have my question here, which is, I'm sure you are not the one data provider in the market, okay? I'm sure there are competitors who are doing the same or similar business of offering structured data. Maybe since you would have already done some kind of research in the market, what kind of businesses do we see playing in the field of data? They could be, are you unique provider by yourself, or there are other players who are doing similar things? Maybe could you shed some light on the ecosystem of data providers like you?
Yeah, absolutely. And no, we certainly aren't the only data provider in this space. And there's a few things we're seeing there. So up until like a few years ago, you'd have seen much more focus on very large multi-market data providers like CoStar and CoreLogic, who built huge proprietary data sets, often through like manually interacting with the market to get insights, and have grown very, very large in markets like the US, UK, Australia, etc. I think what you've seen in the last maybe 5-ish years, and particularly driven by venture capital money, is the emergence of much more new data players who are focused on real estate. So whether that's companies like SafeGraph, for example, looking at footfall data, for example, particularly in the US. These have really opened the door for a lot of players like us, and kind of push the market more to thinking more broadly about what data's out there. And another interesting thing we've seen is that a lot of data players who have traditionally been focused on like advertising technology, so understanding consumer behavior, which is that data's been most valuable in the past for better serving of ads, right? Which is a kind of world I used to work in. Whereas actually, if you take that sort of data and footfall tracking as an example, that's actually something that a lot of these companies who have maybe topped out in the ad tech world are starting to say, well, this is something that could actually be sold into the world of physical retail strategy or real estate development more broadly. And so the lines are certainly blurring a lot more. But I think we embrace that. I think the more data that's available helps people to build their own recipe for insight and develop their own insights internally. But also it increases the need for players like us to help them bring it all into one place, standardize it, and allow them to do their analysis. And a really interesting stat that I read recently was around how time is used by data scientists often, and this is across markets, but up to 80% of a data scientist's time can be spent on data engineering, which is sort of getting the data ready effectively. And typically that's also the least popular job done by data scientists. So if we think of the growing universe of data scientists within the real estate industry, we want them to be able to spend 100% of their time generating new insights, helping to drive strategy, and not doing that up to 80% of prep time. And we think as the amount of data grows, the need for that, engineering layer that we offer is going to become more important as well.
Got it. I was very curious to know that amidst big data providers, how can a new entrant into this space still succeed or still get a foothold into the market? Is this by being very good at one niche that the big players might not be? What does it take for a new entrant? I mean, you have been in the industry for 3 years. I would still call you new. But what should work for you to survive and succeed in a market which has been with bigger players already?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's true of any industry that you're trying to break into, without a big name behind you, is you have to be really disciplined about listening to your customers. I know that sounds like a bit of a cliche, but when you don't have 1,000 customers, you have maybe a dozen customers, you can, and you should take the opportunity to make sure you understand literally everything that they're worried about, that they are planning for the coming year. So I think that's helped us to be quite agile. Like, we can launch a new product or a new offering within about a month. That I think that's rare within larger companies that obviously just take longer to adjust course, which is not unusual. And so I think that has helped us to be more responsive to the market. We've been flexible. If we get asked to do work in new markets, we're happy to jump on that. And I think, that sort of flexibility, listening to feedback, soliciting feedback as much as possible, and just getting as close as possible to your customer has helped us. And every year that we've gone, I think we've iterated in the direction that's been sensible. And then I think also having a really good understanding of what's coming down the pipeline. We try and, to as much as we can, be a sort of a trusted advisor to our customers as well. So although we're providing a certain service or certain types of data, we have great exposure to what's coming down the pipeline, and we try and make sure that we are constantly adding value to particularly senior members of our client teams, so that they see us as that trusted advisor. And I think there's a bit more pressure on smaller companies like ours to be constantly adding value like that. But so far we've been lucky. We work with some really fantastic clients who are interested in trying new types of data. They're interested in experimenting, and they've been very happy to be engaging with smaller startups, which even a few years ago, I think that was much less the case within the industry.
Got it. So being nimble, being responsive, speed of delivery for a new entrant pays to your advantage, isn't it?
Yeah, and one thing I'll maybe add is flexibility. As larger data providers have grown, obviously they've focused on the scalability of their solutions, right? So they want a solution that can be built once and sold 1,000 times, which is great for scalability and margin and all of that. But in terms of actually being able to expand what you can offer within customers, we have the flexibility where we can offer more. We can be flexible in more bespoke offerings, as long as it's still profitable for us to do so. And often what you'll increasingly see on the data side is that people don't want the same data in the same format that everyone else is providing. It sort of detracts from the value there. So we do think there is a need for, even if it's just tweaking the format so that it's can be ingested straight away into a customer's platform, that is really, really valuable. And being more nimble has allowed us to focus a bit more on that.
Got it. I'm curious. So I went through your website. You have 3 solutions: places data, real estate data, and data services. I'm curious to know, maybe you could explain the use case with the real estate data for student housing and build to rent and elderly living. Yeah. What kind of data do you provide to these players who are into student housing, build to rent? And
absolutely. So I mentioned location data earlier, which is what is where in a city. So where is the retail, where are the shopping centers, where are the public points of interest. The second sort of bucket that we look at is these sort of real estate data sets. Typically what we do there's actually 2 main areas there. The first area is that we will pick an asset class. So build to rent is a really good example, or multifamily, as it's known in the US, is a good example, because it's a really high interest asset class at the moment. A lot of people are getting very excited about it, particularly in markets like Australia. And what we're doing is, firstly, we're tracking the locations of the build to rent developments in a market, the live ones, but also the ones that are yet to come to market. We're adding all of the enhanced data that we can get on those developments. So is there parking? Are there lifts? Is there a swimming pool? As much enhanced data as we can in a format that allows people to analyze that easily. And then we will layer on listings data. So for any given week, for any given development, we know how many units are on the market, what's the asking price, the size, the number of bedrooms, does it have a balcony, for example. And that is data that we'll provide weekly to customers. So, within build to rent, that could be advisors in the build to rent space, or it could be the operators and investors in build to rent themselves. And similarly, that works in things like elderly living and student accommodation, etc. Now, what that data allows them to do is firstly understand how the footprint of that asset class is changing over time, but then also what the market dynamics are. So how long things are staying on the market for, what's happening with pricing, and what's happening with availability of different size of units, for example. So there's a lot you can do there. But what we're not doing is doing the analysis ourselves and just pumping out some graphs of what we think is happening to everyone. We want to enable our customers to be able to do their own analysis easily.
Nice.
And we're constantly looking for new asset classes to build those data sets in as well.
Got it. So you're focusing on sectors then. So since you have processed for this sector, then you can go to all the players in that sector and offer this, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. And that's worked quite well for us in the UK, increasingly in Australia, where build to rent is still very nascent, but is attracting huge international investment from markets like the US. So yeah, absolutely. That finding those data sets in those really high interest areas has been has sort of accelerated our route to market, I think, because suddenly you can offer something that's a bit different. You can show the data's trustworthy, and I think people are willing to pay for that in those markets where they're going to be investing billions of dollars in many cases into a market where previously they might not have really had any visibility of as to what's going on there.
Got it. This is very smart of you. So you pick up the sectors which are hot in demand, and then you standardize your data offerings and offer them, isn't it?
And there's a lot of trial and error. There's a lot more trial and success nowadays than like in our early days of the company. But being nimble and being able to try new things has helped us to be able to put something into market, like an early MVP of a data set. And in some cases, that might have been 50% manually put together, right? And then checked manually. And then once we see that appetite, we will operationalize that data set and have that being produced weekly or monthly. And so it's helped us sort of try different things without having to make huge investments. Often we'll work with a couple of early customers. And in some cases, we haven't even thought of the data set. Often a customer has said, it would be nice if we could understand what's going on in this area. And then look, we'll build that out for them. And then we could build that out more broadly for the market as well.
Got it. Yeah, I'm fascinated by the sheer amount of money and investment and so many players in the build to rent sector, in the SFR sector, single family rentals. Earlier, I thought the phenomenon was mostly in the US, but Europe is catching up. All the big names in PropTechs are all servicing to this. So massive opportunity. Excellent. Cool. So what else do I have? So you have your current assets, which is built to rent, multifamily, student accommodation, retirement living. I'm very fascinated also with your blog posts because they are very insightful, and one of them caught my eye, which is POIs, and you said let me just pull that up. That article was did you say POIs is baby or something? Yeah, POIs eyes baby. And so why don't you talk a little bit about the importance of POIs data for real estate and how you're solving for that for PIs. And for layman, how important is, first of all, what is POIs?
Yeah.
I mean, we both are from the industry, so we understand it. But people who are still listening, who are new, what are POIs and why POI data is so important for real estate?
Yeah, absolutely. And so POIs are sort of points of interest. It's basically stuff in a physical location in a city. So, where is the transport infrastructure? Where are the schools? Where are the hospitals, etc. And this is something that it's kind of a no-brainer, but is really sort of been overlooked by the industry to a certain degree. And it's sort of the element of real estate decision making that was previously catered for by someone kind of walking around the area or just having like a broad understanding of an area. So, this is a smart area, this is a family area, this is a safe area, all of these sorts of things, which were kind of, people knew this sort of stuff, but weren't really measuring it. And then when you get to a point in time, like during a pandemic, for example, or a rapid change in the economic position of a country, then actually these can change really quickly. So the high street can go from booming to half empty very, very quickly, for example. So when you're tracking what's in a physical location, some interesting examples like, right, how is the balance of retail changing? Is it high end or is it low end retail? And what does that mean for your strategy? It could be around the location of things like green spaces. This is we've done a piece of work, for example, around livability in Singapore with a partner of ours, Property Guru, which is the main listing site in Southeast Asia. And we were able to provide data around things like the proximity to green spaces, the proximity to waterways, and the impact that this has on health, and then how you can build a score around this for locations. So points of interest could be kind of anything. And when people have accessed this sort of data previously, they've maybe looked at it something that's maybe 2 years out of date, for example, whereas actually understanding how this is changing on like a monthly basis can give you an advance warning on something that's happening in the area. I mean, a good example in markets like the US is the sort of Starbucks effect, right? Like there's a measurable impact of a Starbucks going into an area. And partly it's because that has an impact on the area itself, but actually more so it's the sign of something else that's happening underneath that, something that's happening demographically, gentrification, etc. So, these are great signals that you can get early on as to what's happening in an area. So, we help companies access the right type of location data for whatever they're trying to achieve, and really use that as an advance warning on something that's happening in the area.
Got it. And so because for you this is the core of what you offer, so what is your strategy for data refresh, data updation, ensuring that you're relevant, how much you are, because it's also based on the reputation of what you offer, because if they run analysis and suddenly they realize that a lot has changed in the POIs while your data is still stale, what do you offer as a commitment to your customers in terms of data refresh? And
typically with location data, we look at monthly. We can do it daily if required, but typically monthly is accurate and granular enough. And also our customers, don't really want to be looking at the data or ingesting the data more frequently than that. Where we start to look at things like automated valuation models, where it does have an appetite for granular, up to the minute data, that's where we'd maybe look at something more frequent. But for things like retail locations, monthly is often good enough. And for something that's more slow moving, like the presence of transport infrastructure, like train stations, that might be quarterly, for example. But really, as I said earlier, being flexible with the platform to allow for different frequencies of update is something that is quite important for what we offer. But generally monthly we think is pretty good.
You mentioned about AVMs being more demanding in terms of data refresh. Could you shed some more light? First of all, do you offer your data to AVM providers, and what has been your experience? And
yes,
would you rather not offer them because they're way too demanding?
No, actually, when companies launch things like automated valuation models, and for anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's effectively a model that sucks in as much relevant information as it can to try and come up with an accurate valuation of any given property at any given moment in time. And obviously, there's huge valuable applications of that sort of model, particularly if it can be accurate. So we think it's great when more and more businesses try and build that sort of technology, because again, they're really focused on their algorithms that can generate the best outcome. They're less focused on sourcing of data, right? And also the best thing about this is that with those sorts of providers, we can get data into their model and they can understand quite quickly whether our data is adding value to their model or not. Where people are buying data just to kind of look at and inform their mental decision making, then it's hard to know the value. But if it's being fed into a model that can be tested, like an automated valuation model, then pretty quickly we can understand how much value and how much kind of alpha we're adding to that model. And there's a good learning here for the real estate industry when you compare what's being done with data with like hedge funds. Hedge funds are pretty ahead of the game in terms of what they do with data, the breadth of data they use, and how fastidious they are on measuring the impact of data. So where we've done early trials with hedge funds previously, they've been really good at taking the data and very quickly ascertaining, is this adding anything to our models, which are already bringing in hundreds of different data sets. And we think real estate will move more and more that way. We absolutely embrace that, and we think there'll just be more and more appetite for granular, fresh data, and that's music to our ears.
This conversation is very insightful for me because it is helping me understand trends of how proptech companies should unbundle themselves, because there are proptech companies who start by doing everything.
Yeah.
And just as with every industry, it has to unbundle itself, because there are these niche players who do a piece of that workflow really well. So somebody who does data acquisition really well will always win over a startup which is trying to do everything. Just like any data pipeline. 10 years ago, there were not many players, but today there are so many players at every part of the data pipeline. Similarly, for PropTech companies who are dealing with data, we see players like you finding a role there, so that the startups don't have to build everything from scratch. They don't have to have a data engineering team.
Sure.
So you come in there, you provide them the data. The hassles is less because they don't have to hire a lot of data engineers, maintain the refresh rates, ensure that it is relevant. They would rather focus on the industry they're operating and run analysis and offer key insights, which would be
absolutely. I mean, it's the same if you think of data visualization. I mean, really the necessity for companies to build their own data visualization is pretty limited now, unless you have a really specific use case. If you think of tools like Tableau that are out there already that can be easily built into products and platforms, I think you're right that it helps companies really focus on what their value add is, and if that's algorithms and things, then great, and hopefully companies like ours can help take the broader burden off them.
Got it. And this thought triggered to me because when you were talking about the AVM providers, there are AVM providers who also do data sourcing. Instead, focus on what kind of an AVM provider you want to be. Okay.
Yeah.
Own your own AI and ML models. Own the industry you are supporting. Own the algorithm, and just focus on that, and take data from somebody else. But instead, I see a lot of AVM providers trying to also do the data acquisition, data engineering, and also the AI modeling, and that is where the biggest challenge is. So.
Yeah, I think so. And I think this year is going to be interesting because the companies are going to have to be naturally leaner and very focused, right? I think that's not surprising given the context of the economic context that we will find ourselves in. And I think, what we're doubling down on as a company is that people are going to, not be focusing on the area that we focus on in many cases, and want to really work with partners to be able to take that off their plate. And I think that's going to be an interesting shift in the market. I completely agree that some of those larger tech companies in this space, well-funded startups, etc., are going to be looking at where can they consolidate and where can they really focus down. So as I said, that's an area we'll be really looking at hard. We've just hired in the UK somebody to look specifically at this for us, like how do we become a bigger trusted partner to PropTech companies in markets like the UK, Europe, Asia, and hopefully that'll work out for us.
Excellent. Yeah, and it gives immense confidence in companies like you, because you could do really, really well while solving this for them. Cool. With that context, what does the future vision look like? So you have been in the space for 3 to 4 years now. What does the next 2 to 3 years look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that we think about it is that we want to be that backbone for anyone who's doing anything in data in real estate. So whether you're building a tool, building a platform, you're hiring your first data science team, whatever it is across the ecosystem, we want to be that trusted backbone that's taking this data layer, the headaches of data engineering off all of those companies. So in order to do that, we will be expanding our geographic presence and focus. A large percentage of what we do at the moment is, as I said, sort of UK, Australia, Southeast Asia. We'll be expanding that and we'll be hiring accordingly. But also we'll be looking at other pain points in that ecosystem. So we've moved from just data sourcing to broader data engineering and data product development. But we're looking at some of the other services that we can take off people's plates so that we can become that sort of trusted provider across the data value chain. So we'll be continuing to work with predominantly large businesses across those 3 buckets I mentioned. But yeah, very happy to have any conversations around data headaches that people have more broadly as well.
So you mentioned large organizations. Would you be open to work with startups? So there is a startup, great idea, but they want a good strategic data player, because as you said, it is all about optimizing your resources, and you do not want to promise to the investors that you want to build an entire data team. Would they put on the slide deck saying that no, Reomnify is our data partner, and we are solving this? Is this the kind of conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. And something we'll be looking at this year is how we partner with venture capital firms who are active in PropTech to support their portfolio of companies and help them be more frugal with the money that they raise, right? So that's something we'll be specifically looking at. And broadly, when you're looking at partnering, and whenever we're working with companies in a space, we see ourselves as partners. You really want to be partnering with large companies or growing companies, or ideally both. But so yeah, interesting startups who we can grow with. That's something we're absolutely interested in.
Excellent. Well, this brings us to an end of a fascinating conversation with Alex. Alex, I had a lot of aha moments. I could connect a lot of dots, and then suddenly new insights formed in my head. Thank you for taking time out on an evening, on a weekday, Alex, and all the best for your future.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks a lot. Really appreciate it.
See you around, Alex.
All right.